President had countered by imposing an embargo on oil and other materials to Japan. The Dutch East Indies, further south, was the closest alternative source of oil. The San Francisco Naval Wiretap Unit was alerted to pick up Japanese reactions to the embargoes.
They were looking for the reaction to embargoes. I would say that my memory recalls that we were advised of almost every embargo of any nature that was placed on oil or rubber that related to the Pacific. This meant whether it came from the United States or whether it came from India around the Horn there, and we were basically advised to let the translators point to the translators where there was a reference to this embargo.
On Oahu, the naval and army commanders heard nothing of the Japanese reactions to the embargoes. They were advised that although the bans were enforced, no hostile reaction by Japan was expected. Kimmel, Hanafi believes, was badly served.
Pearl Harbor did not have the purple machine which was necessary to intercept the critical Japanese diplomatic messages. As a consequence, Kimmel was dependent upon Washington to get him that type of intelligence. From time to time he received messages indicating that he was getting some of the intercepts. He expected that he would get all of that type of information which affected his disposition. He had specifically asked for intelligence information that bore upon his problem of defense of the fleet and the base, and he'd been assured he was going to get it. So the absence of the machine and the sporadic intercepts which he got lulled him into a false security in the belief he was getting the intelligence which he needed, and he wasn't.
Kimmel continually warned the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Harold Stark, that a strong fleet was required to deter Japan. He even broadcast a warning after seeing an aircraft carrier, 3 battleships, 4 cruisers, and 18 destroyers transferred to the Atlantic. That summer, aboard the USS Augusta, Kimmel's concern must have been shared by Roosevelt and Churchill, but the two leaders discounted the threat in the Pacific and decided that they should go all out to defeat Germany first. It is now known that as they made that decision, Churchill had far more information on Japan than Roosevelt. One man now admits that the British were reading Yamamoto's secret code 2 years before the Augusta meeting. That man, Eric Nave, had been seconded from the Royal Australian Navy to work on Japanese codes for Great Britain. Nave had worked closely with Japanese staff officers and knew their language and their naval systems. With his specialized knowledge, Nave had been deciphering Japanese naval codes since the 30s. A few years before the war, he had been sent to a station in Singapore. The team there had broken many ciphers, but the JN-25 code was new to them all.
London sent out to us via a Lieutenant Malcolm Burnett, who'd been over there on leave. He brought back an explanation of the system of breaking this JN-25, and this would be in 39. I would think the latter half of 1939, and that is when we first started working on it. As this code gradually got more widespread, the volume of traffic increased, and of course other traffic decreased, and it was a gradual process, but I would say over 12 months it became in general use, and we knew then that this was the great book now, the system. We sent Lieutenant Commander Burnett over to Corregidor to take over and to wise him up into the ways of the JN-25. And he came back and he told me that the Americans were reading, that is, in Corregidor, were reading no operational codes at all.
Identification groups revealed information about ships and their locations. All of it was of vital interest to British naval chiefs in London, sometimes revealing Japanese intelligence about British ships. It was crucial to British naval intelligence that every message was intercepted.
The reception there in China, and particularly from Hong Kong, stonecutters, was excellent. And we could read Tokyo 24 hours a day. And the possibility of missing an important dispatch, I think, just didn't exist. Atmospherics, of course, was one thing, but you were up against that all the time with was. But we generally could overcome that. We could get static pretty bad at times. It was difficult, yes, but for the most part, we were not in a position where you could miss a certain period during the day or a whole message at any time. You had confidence you could really hear all the traffic.
Isolated in the Central Pacific, the closest Kimmel ever got to the detailed planning of the Japanese Navy was information that could be picked up from radio interception and direction findings techniques. From Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor, the Americans listened in day and night to Japanese naval signals sent by radio throughout the fleet. Hypo was one of a ring of stations which worked together to get radio fixes on Japanese naval transmitters. It fell to the head of Station Hypo, Commander Joseph Rochefort, to turn these radio intercepts into useful intelligence.
In our analysis of the radio traffic emanating from the Japanese, normally we were in a position to say where the major parts of the fleet were at most any time. Like we'd say they're in the home ports, they're in the inland sea, they're training, or that sort of thing.
While Rochefort's men watched the Japanese Navy, the Army was also alerted. At Fort Shafter, General Short had completed his defensive strategy. He was still concerned that he did not have enough planes to patrol the skies around the island, but otherwise he felt quite confident that with enough warning he could defend the harbor and the fleet. But Short was never to learn that only a few hundred yards away from his own house on Palm Circle, Washington had set up a source of secret information. This monitoring station, designated MS-5, had been ordered to tap into the Trans-Pacific cable for messages addressed to the Japanese consulate a few miles away in Honolulu. The small signals team at the station was ordered to send the messages directly to Army intelligence in Washington, undeciphered. They had instructions that no one on the island was to be informed of these messages. On September 24th, the Army operator intercepted a message for the consulate. It was in a Japanese consular code the Americans could read. At the consulate, the message must have been a stark indication of how important Pearl Harbor was becoming to the Foreign Office in Tokyo. Tokyo also wanted the harbor sectioned into 5 areas. Area A was to correspond to the east side of Ford Island, where the carriers and battleships berthed. Area B was to cover the west side of the island. Area C held smaller ships. Area D had moorings for support vessels, as did Area E. The information demanded was